Hello and a very special welcome to this ECFR pre-Christmas event. I'm absolutely thrilled to be welcoming Josep Borrell, the EU's High Representative and Vice President of the European Commission, to discuss the meaning of strategic autonomy and sovereignty and how we can help make Europe more powerful on the world stage. We are going to be formally launching ECFR's newest report on the subject. And I think we're having this discussion on quite an auspicious day. If I'm right, the High Representative today has been chairing a meeting with some of the remaining parties of the Iran nuclear deal to discuss a way forward on one of the biggest successes of European diplomacy in the last period of time. And our work on strategic sovereignty started in 2018 when the US introduced secondary sanctions, which effectively threatened to blow up one of these big historic EU foreign policy achievements. We began work then with a group of 8 European governments, EU institutions and multilateral organizations, and been working very closely with the External Action Service as well to look at what we could do to give meaning to the idea of European sovereignty or strategic autonomy and how it could be translated into concrete actions. In our first report, we made 56 concrete policy recommendations, and today we're going to be launching the next series of reports, which include 3 regional reports and an updated report which looks at the sovereignty agenda. And in my background, I have this pentagon of European sovereignty, which looks at the 5 different dimensions that we've been addressing, expanding outwards from security to look at economic sovereignty, at digital, at healthcare, at climate change, as well as the more classical security and defense agenda. And under each of these headlines, we have a number of concrete actions which Europeans could take. For example, adding further parts of the health sector to the new investment screening procedure, developing a collective defense instrument against economic coercion, a security compact for Eastern Partnership states, a European regulatory framework for ethical AI, as well as ideas on how to back the European Green Deal with a sustainable development offer. We're going to talk about some of these concrete ideas later on. But I'm particularly thrilled that Josep Borrell has agreed to launch this because this is an agenda which cuts across all of the external aspects of European internal policy, and is also something which cuts across the relationship between EU institutions and what national governments are doing. So there's nobody who's going to be more central to making the idea of strategic autonomy or sovereignty go from being an abstract concept into a concrete reality and something which allows the EU to help protect European citizens, to make its state stronger and to keep our economy on track in these very difficult circumstances. So very, very grateful to you, Josep, for taking the time to talk about these big topics with me now. And before I turn to you, I just want to make a couple of housekeeping points. We're going to be live streaming the first half an hour of this discussion. And if people want to tweet under that, you can do that under the hashtag ECFR events. And then after that, after 30 minutes, we will enter an offline discussion and have another 30 minutes of conversation where people can ask direct questions to the HRVP. So there'll be a very short break between these 2 elements. But now, without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Josep Borrell, the High Representative for Foreign Policy and the Vice President of the European Commission. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mark. Thank you for the invitation. In fact, this is the kind of things I like to do much, to participate on meetings like this with people who has the capacity and the time to think deeper, and to talk about such important issues as how can we make Europe stronger in the world. So thank you, and let me start by congratulating you on this impressive research work that you have done, 10 papers, 56 recommendations, and a final policy chapeau with 5 clear priorities. I think you were totally right in identifying the priorities. Those are the ones that the European Union and member states has recently outlined: health, Why not? How not? On these times of virus, economy, security, digital, and climate. And I think nothing could be more topical at a time of increasing global and regional geopolitical competition, continuous impact of COVID, and at the moment where we are redefining the transatlantic relationship with the new American administration. All this happens in a context of intense discussion over the meaning of European sovereignty. France and Germany are using it more and more. The two ministers, when they wrote articles, they used both together these terms, mainly more than a strategic autonomy. Well, one thing or another, whatever you want to call it, at the end, the issue is how do we make Europe more stronger, more able to act. I don't think we have to avoid an ideological or theological debate on a discussion about terminology, but things has a name, and we have names to name things, and we have to understand what do we mean when we use a word. And what we have to do is to operationalize or make it operational by addressing as soon as possible concrete things about our vulnerabilities and about seizing new opportunities. Strategic autonomy is not a goal on itself. It's a process. It's a process to look for the political survival of the European Union, facing risk. The biggest one is becoming irrelevant if we do not act to defend our interests and values. Allow me to be focusing on three questions. First, do we have what it takes to respond to those instrumentalizing interdependency to achieve political goals? Science, technology, and data are becoming sources and instruments of power in international politics. Maybe they have always been, but today more than ever, and the technology is creating a big accelerator of these dynamics. We have nothing against interdependency, and the EU remains an opponent to protectionism. Well, as far as provided this interdependency is chosen, not imposed to us, provided there is a genuine interest in cooperation in an achieving common objective. And what I observe is that the European Union is increasingly seen as a partner of choice by countries around the world, because we are offering opportunities for progress and not seeking to weaponize our relations or bully our partners. And we expect the same from them. Second, do we have what it takes to reinforce our capacity to decide and to act in order to become a more credible global actor, promoting multilateralism, as we always say, but also reinforcing these transatlantic relations? The EU themselves are more worried about having a weak and divided Europe as partner than about the European Union building further its strategic autonomy. You know, I am sure that the US would like to have a stronger than a weaker Europe as a partner. Because strategic autonomy does not imply a strategic decoupling from the US or weakening NATO. You know, every time I am saying strategic autonomy, someone raises their hand and says, and what about NATO? Well, nothing about NATO. It's nothing against NATO. To the contrary, I think European initiatives such as PESCO, Strategic Compass, are the proof that Europeans are ready to do their part and to reinforce the European pillar of the alliance. This is true from a capacity point of view, but also from an operational point of view. For example, there are now French forces in Estonia, and there are Estonian special forces alongside France and Mali. And I am not sure that without Europe, a stronger Europe, we would have been seen having Baltic countries present in Africa. Certainly not. And finally, do we have what it takes to address beyond defense issues, key sovereignty challenges beyond defense, as the report mentions, health, economic, digital, and climate, as well as the traditional threats that Europe faces in the parts of the world that are most vital to the European interest? This is the third question. In any case, the task ahead of us is huge and cuts across all sectors: digital, artificial intelligence, energy, maritime, space. It's not geographical approaches, which is at that moment prevalent. It's across all sectors, transversal issues with blurred internal external borders. And there are also some lessons to learn about it. From the current pandemic crisis, in particular, on the resilience and diversification of supply chains for masks or antibiotics. 1 year ago, 9 months ago, we were talking about the scarcity of such a mask, which is no way a strategic object, until it became a strategic object due to the fact that there were not supplies. The same thing can happen for the vaccine. Well, we have avoided vaccine nationalism, but how do we do to make the vaccine a global public good available to everybody, everywhere, independently of their economic capacity? It's easy said than done. We are also reassessing our economy, trade and financial tools to make ourselves stronger. Foreign investment screening, new types of sanctions, reinforce trade and competition instruments, the European Raw Materials Alliance, to cite just a few examples. Well, for sure, it's not enough. We must also reinforce our own diplomatic toolbox. There is no such a thing as a clear delimitation between economy and security, internal and external, digital diplomacy, economic diplomacy, energy diplomacy, climate diplomacy. Everything has its diplomatic side and everything is mixed. But we must be willing to develop all of them with the support of our impressive asset, which is the network of the European Union delegations across the world, with more than 5,000 people deployed. And this is a very important tool that has to be used maybe in a more efficient way. This is about protecting our norms and standards, and also about creating a strategic culture shared by all Europeans, a common European strategic culture. It's quite impossible to pretend to have a foreign policy, a common foreign policy, if you don't share a minimum understanding of how the world is, and how the world works. We also need to make better use of our current and future partnership, not only in the southern and in the east, where Southern Neighbourhood and Eastern Neighbourhood are already some concept that has been fully accepted and used, but also migration, hybrid threats, cross-border crimes in Africa and in Asia, especially. We have a lot of political dialogues at bilateral, regional, and multilateral level. But I think we must re-engage to let our partners know what se ha ido. I think we have lost the communication.
No, you're still online.
I'm still online, but then I lose you. No? Okay, then I continue. They're saying something about Africa and Asia and elsewhere, saying that we have a lot of political dialogues at bilateral, regional, multilateral level, but I think we have to rethink how do we do that and re-engage to let our partners to know what we expect from them and what we can really offer to them. So thanks for this good report. I don't want to be longer. I will ask my team to further reflect on some of your recommendations and come back to you in order to help us to try to implement it, and in any case, to be a raw material for the debates and works of the External Action Service, the Commission, and the member states in the very complex institutional architecture of the European Union. Thank you, Mark. And now I am ready to learn more from listening to you. No noise.
Thank you very much. We're going to open it up for some questions quite soon, but maybe I can ask you a couple of questions just to expand on some of the very interesting points that you made. The first is really to talk a bit about the United States of America, because the whole shift towards thinking about strategic autonomy and sovereignty was in part something which was a painful realization that Donald Trump was treating the EU as a hostile actor in lots of different ways, and was actively trying to put pressure on different parts of EU foreign policy making, starting with the Iran nuclear deal, but in lots of other areas as well. Obviously, we have a very different situation going forward with Joe Biden going to the White House. You said before that the Americans under Biden, I think, are more worried about a weak Europe than one which can stand on its own 2 feet. I think that's right. But I would be interested to hear a bit more about how you see the building of strategic autonomy and sovereignty taking place in this new political environment, and also whether it could, in fact, in some ways make it easier to get Europeans more united on it. Because one of the reasons there were these active debates about terminology that you talked about before was that some member states were worried that it seemed like an anti-American agenda, and maybe that's not going to be the case if Biden's in the White House.
Well, I'm not sure. As I said, there are two reluctances about strategic autonomy. One reluctancy comes from the people defending free trade and saying, oh, autonomy, what does it mean that you don't want to depend on others? Maybe you want to become autarky. No? Autonomy brings to autarky.
Yeah.
And that we should say open strategic autonomy to make clear that there is nothing against closing borders to trade. Well, I think this is something that has to be overcome. For sure, autonomy doesn't mean autarky. We don't want to be protectionist, but we have to protect ourselves. One can protect without being protectionist. And we have to be preventionist. We have to prevent which are the risks and to face them. And the other is about the US relationship. You want to be autonomous? Autonomous with respect whom? Because you are autonomous with respect someone. You mean that you want to weaken the transatlantic relations? Not at all. And that's why some people prefer the word sovereignty, which for me is stronger than autonomous. Being sovereign, it's more than being autonomous. But in spite of that, my friends from Germany and France tend to use sovereignty because they believe this word doesn't include any kind of reluctancy with respect to transatlantic relations. Autonomous with respect to sovereign is a broader concept. You don't have to be sovereign with respect to someone because you are sovereign with respect to everybody. But it's a stronger requirement to be sovereign. It's not an agreed language of the European Union. And the other day, we were unable to use this word on the introduction of a council, not the European Council, but the council I'm chairing, on a council conclusions, because some member states said, okay, sovereignty is not an agreed language of the European Union. So I think the problem will become the same with Biden or with Trump. Let me say something more. Trump has been awakening us from a kind of strategic somnambulism, no? Or strategic laziness, no? We don't have to care. The US are there. And well, Trump has told us, well, that's not sure that I am going to be there, at least not for certain things. And the risk is that we go to sleep again. Say, oh, now with Biden, this risk has disappeared, and now the US becomes a reliable partner, so we don't have to take care of that. No. The US will no longer be engaged in large-scale military operations in Africa and in the Middle East, and will leave to Europe crisis and conflict resolution in our immediate neighborhood. We should have that clearly in our minds. It's not a matter that one president or another. I think that it's clear that there is a will from the US to let the Europeans to take care of our own problems. And an exclusive reference to NATO is no longer sufficient to face these challenges.
So another big set of issues that you talked upon was about how increasingly foreign policy isn't just about diplomacy and defense, but it's about the external aspects of internal policies. And that was at the heart of the Lisbon agenda, which created your role, was thinking about how we can make sure that there is more of a strategic focus on these internal areas. How do you think that the world has changed that agenda now? Because obviously when Lisbon was agreed, we hadn't had COVID, we hadn't seen the weaponization of global finance in the way that we have recently. What concrete ideas do you think we need to learn about how to inject more strategic thinking in the domestic discussions, and also to bridge what the member states are doing and what the EU is doing? Because in some areas, there are obviously very strong competencies, like in trade or in competition policy, but there are a lot of areas which are much more decentralized and shared, where it's less clear what is the role for the EU, what the member states can do, and how they can work together more effectively.
Yeah, look, it's clear that the European Union has been building upon two pillars, intergovernmental one and the communitarian one. Everybody knows it, but it's very clear when you have in the place I am now, because the Treaty of Lisbon is clear, it's very clear about it. Foreign policy and defense policy remains exclusive competence of the member states. From time to time, it's good to remember that. But at the same time, some tools of the foreign policy has been communitarized, 100% or partially. Trade is a typical example. Is part of the foreign policy of one country? Oh, yes, it for sure. But is in the hands of the Commission. Development aid. Well, we have an European policy of development aid, not exclusive because the member states have still their own. you have to coordinate them, or crisis management, or technological policies. A set of important dimensions of the external policy are not on the hands of the state 100%. So you have to try to put together the fact that external policy, foreign policy, is part of the intergovernmental pillar, but the community pillar has a lot to say and a lot to do on external relations. And these external relations go further than security and defense. Today, they said trade, but finance and international role of the euro. How can you pretend to be a geopolitical power if you don't have the power of a strong currency being used as such? Or digital energy, space, maritime, climate, I've been mentioning before. And there is a kind of asymmetrical interdependency that threatens European interests and values, and at the end, an increase of a dependency for critical products. From critical products, our dependency has been increasing. Raw and rare materials, batteries, masks, conjuncturally, antibiotics, protection of data, protection of critical infrastructures, disinformation, cyber attacks, all that are new threats. Is our autonomy increasing or decreasing on these fields? Well, in some of them, it has been decreasing. And then, which is the border between internal and external today? Which is the border on facing climate change or facing terrorism or facing disinformation? There is no border. There is no border. And the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, each of one of them has to be reinventing themselves, because the classical role of a Ministry of Foreign Affairs has been changing rapidly, because all ministers, all commissioners have an external dimension on their job. It's something that is going to be increasing every day due to the fact that there is no border for anything, and all internal policy has an external dimension. Migration is maybe the most critical example for us. It's an internal policy. One, you have to take care of the migrants arriving, but before they arrive, is a matter of internal policy? No, it's a matter of external policy, or relationship with the countries of origin and transit. That's why we need to have an European battery alliance, an European raw material alliance, foreign investment screening, review our agreements on trade and competition, on investments. By the way, good news, maybe we can have at the end of the year an agreement with China on investment. And we have to make better use of all our current partnerships. Every time I am chairing a council of partnership, I say to myself, well, this has to be used better. This has to be used deeper. This has to be relating and engaging with a lot of new things, not the classical ones of being good neighbors, but participating in a set of new alliance of like-minded countries with whom we share a common interest and common values.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for answering my first couple of questions. It's time now to say goodbye to our online audience. Thank you very much to all of you for listening. Please continue to follow ECFR's work on strategic sovereignty at www.ecfr.eu.